Hello everybody. This is the lecture to accompany Chapter 5 in your textbook. I really want you to read Chapter 5 carefully because there's a lot of things in there that I simply don't have time to discuss in this short lecture. All right, let's talk about language. The definition of language is a structured system of symbols used for communicating meaning. Now, I posted a link about the way in which animals communicate and how different that kind of communication is from the way humans communicate. Obviously, if you own an animal, you know that it communicates with you, but that animal is not using language the way that we are defining it here. Animal communication simply doesn't have the structure and rules that language has. Also, our brains and bodies are designed to be able to use language in a much more complex and intricate way. Language is the use of symbols. Language is the specific use of words, whether they're written or spoken or signed or put in shorthand, to create meaning. Words are symbols that represent ideas or objects. They do not, however, constitute those objects. Let me give you an example. If I say the word chair, a chair does not fall out of my mouth because the only connection between the word chair and the thing that we know is a chair is because we have decided that those things are connected. So the meaning of words and symbols also evolves over time, and I'm sure you can think of several words that have changed their meaning over time. Language is arbitrary, or mostly arbitrary. Words represent things and ideas, not necessarily because there is any physical connection to those things or ideas. It's because that we have all decided that's what the word means. Word meanings, as I said, can change over time because we eventually decide that the word means something else now. So meanings are in people. The meaning is not in the word itself. It is in the person or in the culture, the society. Words have no innate meanings in and of themselves. So language is symbolic and arbitrary. So how do we still basically understand each other? Well, we understand each other because language is governed by rules. And since we understand those rules, we generally understand what other people are saying to us. And those rules are phonological, syntactic, semantic, and pragmatic. Phonological rules are the correct or accepted pronunciation of a word. So whether it's correct according to the dictionary or for dialects, it's correct according to the region in which you're saying it, we all understand what the correct or accepted pronunciation of a word is. Then there are syntactic rules, saying words in the correct order to make sense out of those words. Now, you can compare that to other languages because in different languages, there are different syntactic rules. Adverbs or adjectives might come after the noun or the verb itself. So the structure of a sentence might be a little bit different in a different language. So if somebody is trying to learn English, then they have to really pay attention to the syntactic rules of English so that when they say a sentence, that sentence makes sense. Then there are semantic rules. Semantics have to do with the meanings of individual words. Now, most words have more than one meaning, so if you look up a word in the dictionary, you're probably going to see more than one meaning attached to the word, but semantics has to do with the individual meanings of individual words. Pragmatic rules, on the other hand, are the meanings of words in context. So when you put the whole sentence together, what do the words mean? Even if they have a different meaning outside of that sentence, within that sentence they mean something in particular. So we use our knowledge of context and common sense to figure out what the meaning of a particular word is in the sentence itself. So because we understand all those things, we understand each other. Language has layers of meaning, and one of the ways in which we can explain that is through the denotative and connotative meanings of words. As I said, most words have more than one meaning, but it's not just the dictionary definitions, it's also the psychological, the implied, the personal meaning of a word. The dictionary definition is the denotative meaning of a word. The implied or personal or emotional connection that we have to individual words is their connotative meanings. For instance, the word cat. You look up cat in the dictionary and basically it's a mammal, a feline. However, the connotative meaning could be different depending on the person thinking about the word cat. If you like cats, then you're going to have a warm and fuzzy feeling about the warm and fuzzy felines. But if you do not like cats, or you're allergic to cats, or cats are somehow negatively connected in your mind, then the connotative meaning is going to be quite different from somebody else. The term loaded language has to do with the connotative meanings of words. There are some words in our culture that have either very, very strong positive or very, very strong negative connotations. Another word for that is God or devil terms. So let me give you an example. For a God term, which is a very, very strong positive correlation, in our society we think of the terms freedom and rights. Those words have very, very strong positive connotations in our society, whereas the word terrorist has a very negative connotation. So just even saying freedom in our society calls up a lot of emotional connections, as does the word terrorism. It calls up a lot of negative connotations. The book discusses the semantic triangle. Now remember, semantics is about the meanings of words. So in this case, the semantic triangle, this illustration shows that there are at least 3 different kinds of meanings connected to every single word. The symbol, which is the word itself being communicated, and as you can see in the lower left corner, the word is home, and it's spelled out right there. That is the symbol in and of itself. Then, if we move up to the top, we see the referent. The referent is the word's denotative meaning. So if you look up home in the dictionary, it would probably say something like a place where people live. And there is a picture of a home right there. Now if we travel down to the right side, you see what's called the reference, and that is the word's connotative meaning. The connotative meaning for many people, when they hear the word home, they think of their family and the positive connections that their home has to them. Now, if your thoughts about home don't fall into that category, maybe home was not a good place for you, then that reference is going to be different for you than it would be for someone else. And that is the connotative meaning of the word. Language also varies in clarity because many words have more than one definition and often many meanings. The meaning of any particular word can be very ambiguous. Sometimes people use ambiguous language intentionally. If somebody comes up to you and asks you to go to their party and you really don't necessarily want to go to their party, but you don't want to be rude, you might say something like, "Wow, that sounds like fun." That's pretty ambiguous. You have neither said you're not going or that you are going. So that's an example of how we can use language in a somewhat ambiguous way. Language is also bound by context and culture. Many differences between societies and cultures are reflected in the way that they use language. And it's not just the language that they speak, but by the meanings that they associate with language. Here's an example, and this kind of points out the difference between Japanese culture, which is very collectivistic, and American culture, which is very individualistic. So the Japanese saying, "It is the nail that sticks out that gets hammered down," that really does point to them being a collectivistic culture where, we all work together, nobody should stick out. Whereas the American saying, "The squeaky wheel gets the grease," obviously if you want to get something done, you gotta stick out. and then people will pay attention to you. So very, very different ideas about their cultures are reflected in those two sayings. Words are very, very powerful. And one of the most powerful things that we have is our name. Naming defines us and differentiates us from the people around us, and it is a very strong linguistic device. Names can give clues to demographic characteristics like gender, ethnicity, age, although those clues can sometimes be deceiving. We also tend to apply certain characteristics to a person based on their name. We assume, without seeing them, that Jennifer is more attractive than Ethel, or William is more mature than Billy. Now, those things may not be the case, but it is an assumption based on their name. How many people have more than one email address? Perhaps you use one with your actual name and another with some other description of yourself, like hot, sexy Vegas babe at yahoo.com or something of that nature. Well, probably not. But an email address is also a name and how we differentiate and define ourselves. Naming practices have varied by culture and time. Popular names have changed over the last century. Specific middle names are given to people in specific countries or cultures. A lot of people use compound first names. After marriage, some women take their husband's name traditionally. Others can hyphenate both names or keep their own name, but all of those choices symbolize some kind of meaning. Persuasion is the process of convincing people to think or act in a certain way, mostly through the use of language. We think that there's something special about persuasion, but we are doing it all the time. In order to live in this world, we do have to be somewhat persuasive. Aristotle, 2,500 years ago, came up with what he called proofs, ways in which people can be persuasive to other people. And these were ethos, pathos, and logos. Ethos is the credibility of the speaker. So Aristotle saw that people needed to have positive feelings about the person whose message that they were considering. A person who appears to be respectable, trustworthy, they're generally more persuasive than someone who is not. And that is what he called ethos. Pathos has to do with appealing to people's emotions. When people are emotionally roused, they are more likely, if it's the right emotion, to listen to and buy into your argument. And then logos. A third way to appeal to people is to appeal to their sense of logic and reasoning. People like to think that what they are buying into in a persuasive message is something that makes sense. So the extent to which others perceive us to be competent and trustworthy is, as I said before, called credibility. And that perception is based on their knowledge of our experience and training, as well as whether we appear to have their best interests in mind and whether they can believe that we can be trusted. So language is intimately tied with credibility. The words that we use determine how others view us. Now, there are a couple of things here on this page. Cliches, dialects, equivocation, weasel words, and all-ness statement that can negatively affect your credibility as a persuader. And the first one is cliches, and these are sayings that are said over and over to the point where they no longer have meaning. Perhaps they might once have been considered novel, but they've been overused and lost their effectiveness. And I have this example of let's make sure we're all on the same page. I had a supervisor in a previous job who said that at least 5 times a day, to the point where I wanted to throttle her. But I didn't. It no longer carried the same weight that it did when she first started to use it because she used it too much. And so it damaged her credibility. Then there are dialects, which are variations on a language that's shared by people of a certain region or social class. So you think of a southern dialect, a dialect from someone who's from the Bronx, an Australian accent, and there may be stereotypes, unfortunately, that are associated with certain dialects. So it's a little bit outside of your control if you have a particular dialect that has a negative stereotype associated with it. But you have to be aware that those kinds of things might exist for your particular dialect and work with that. Then there's something called equivocation, which is strategic ambiguity, like the example where the person didn't actually say she was going to go to your party. This is done when you either don't want to admit you don't know something or when you don't want to give a specific answer because you fear the consequences of that action. Then there are weasel words, and weasel words are terms or phrases intended to mislead listeners by applying something that they don't actually say. For instance, there's a sugarless gum commercial where they say that this sugarless gum may help prevent cavities, or 4 out of 5 dentists recommend this gum for patients who chew gum. What do those things mean? It may help prevent cavities. It may not. What does it mean to help? Those are very misleading words. And 4 out of 5 dentists recommend this gum. So what does that mean? We assume that means 80% of all dentists recommend this gum, but that's not what they said. 4 out of 5 dentists. Maybe they talked to 5 dentists and 4 said, yeah, sure, why not? So those are weasel words because they are misleading, but we just kind of buy right into them. So be careful with those. And then there's something called allness statements, claiming something as true without exception. So you make a general claim without any evidence. Oh, everybody knows that, and then fill in the blank space. They are sweeping generalizations and you just throw them in there and expect people to believe you. And a lot of times people do. But just as many times people are like, What do you mean? Give me some evidence. What exactly are you talking about? Is there any case where this has not been proven to be true? Which really annoys the person throwing out an allness statement because they just want you to buy into those things. So as you can see, persuasion can be used unethically. And a lot of the ways in which we do that, we're not even intending to be unethical, but the way we use language, it can be manipulative and coercive. So again, something to watch out for. Language is indeed powerful. It expresses affection and intimacy. Humans need these things. We cannot thrive without them. So obviously there's a lot of nonverbal communication that we do to express these things, and we'll talk about that next week. But words are critical to these kinds of expressions as well. Verbal statements can express feelings, the importance of a relationship, the hopes and dreams that you have about a relationship, and the value of that relationship to you. So communicating these things is very healthy for the relationship and for the people in them. Researcher Ted Houston determined that the more affectionate communication, in other words, the more affectionate words, that two people communicated to each other, especially during the first 2 years of their marriage, the more likely they were to remain married 13 years later. So a lot of affection expressed verbally up front can set the stage for a successful marriage. Words can provide comfort and healing. All of us have been in a situation where someone's words have helped us to feel better. And we've probably all helped, or at least tried to help, when someone else was in distress by using words. We use language to comfort other people, to acknowledge loss, express sympathy, to offer assistance, and we can even use language to comfort ourselves. Lots of people write their thoughts and feelings down in journaling, keeping a diary, writing a blog. Studies have shown that people who write about a stressful situation actually reduce their level of stress and are healthier after they express those things. So now we're going to talk about the ways in which we use and abuse language. And we're going to specifically look at humor euphemisms, slang, libel and slander, profanity, and hate speech. So, humor. What's so funny? Why do we need humor? Well, laughter is a stress relief. We use humor to feel better. It allows us to see things in a different way. The most important aspect of humor is what is called violation of expectations. In other words, something that we don't expect happens in the joke, and that's where the humor lies. Now, there are a lot of good things about humor. It makes social interaction enjoyable. Think about sitting around and laughing with your friends. It diffuses stress. Something like inside jokes between two people solidify the bond between them. Have you ever done that with a friend where you just looked at each other and lost it because something happened in context, and it was something that you guys had already made a joke about, and it happens, and then you just look at each other and you can't hold it in. A good sense of humor is often very attractive in a mate. However, humor can be harmful. It can be used to demean social or cultural groups or marginalized populations. Sometimes off-color or dirty jokes, as it were, can cause embarrassment or distress, depending on the audience, even if they weren't meant to offend. Euphemisms are vague, mild expressions that are used in place of more blunt or harsh language when we want to talk about sensitive topics without fear of offending or embarrassing somebody. So your book has a couple of pretty effective euphemisms, such as sleeping together. You're not sleeping when you're sleeping together. You're obviously having sex. Praying at the porcelain altar instead of vomiting in the toilet. He was let go at work instead of got fired. So the euphemism sounds less harsh. So that can be a good way to talk about somebody, especially if someone maybe is young or old or otherwise may not appreciate the particular topic that you're discussing. However, it can cover up the real issue or disguise or distort meaning. For example, you've heard the term collateral damage. Well, that's a nice way of saying killing innocent civilians. So as you can see, euphemisms may have a positive aspect to them, but definitely can have a negative aspect to them. Slang and jargon are the language of co-cultures or subcultures, and slang is the informal, unconventional use of language that's only understood by members of particular groups. And jargon is technical vocabulary that's related to certain professions or occupations, like medical terminology, engineering, law enforcement, nursing, things like that. There are good things about slang and jargon because they can help you identify who is part of your social network and connect with them. They can also help people communicate precisely and efficiently in particular jobs by the use of jargon. But there are some bad things about slang and jargon because it can make people around you feel like outsiders because it's exclusive to your particular group, so they might feel excluded. Libel and slander. These are defamatory statements made about others. Now, they are two different things. People do tend to get them confused. Libel is defamatory statements made in some kind of recorded fashion, whether that's print, photo, video, motion picture, some other fixed medium. Slander is defamatory statements spoken aloud. So gossip, rumor spreading, that's slander. Usually for legal purposes, it depends on whether the statement made is true or false as to whether someone can be charged with libel or slander. However, if a statement is true but serves no prevailing public interest, then it might actually qualify as libel or slander. Generally, a public figure has a more difficult time proving libel or slander simply because does it serve a public interest to know more about this person? So even if it is defamatory, even if it's true, even if it's false, they may not be able to prove libel. So the laws surrounding that are pretty complicated. For someone who is not in the public eye, then it might be a little bit easier to prove libel and slander. Profanity is offensive language, vulgar, rude, obscene, in the context in which it's used. It's very context specific. A lot of people feel insulted by its use and others simply don't. Profanity is used often as a social lubricant that maintains informality and can sometimes reinforce the social bonds that people have with each other. Profanity is used a lot in comedy to create an expectation that no subject is taboo. So the comic, through the use of profanity, can say, look, I can talk about anything, and find the humor in anything. However, profanity can certainly insult and degrade others, whether they're just insulted by the language itself, or if you're using profanity directed at that person, that can be insulting and damaging. And an overuse of profanity can certainly damage your credibility because, like I said, the hearer might be offended, or it might just show that the verbal skills of the speaker are low. As my husband often says, profanity is great if you use it in the correct context, but if every other word is the F-bomb, number one, it's hard to listen to, and it's hard to get to the meaning, and it just seems to point out to the listeners that maybe you don't know all that many words, so you keep having to use the same ones over and over. Then there's hate speech. Hate speech is actually considered a form of profanity. It's profanity with a specific hurtful purpose. It's designed to denigrate, intimidate, or dehumanize specific populations. Obviously, based on sex, ethnicity, religion, sexual orientation, disability, political or moral views, and hey, it's political season, so we're seeing this all over the place. Hate speech is not necessarily illegal. However, speech that incites people to commit violence against others is usually unprotected speech. There are arguments on both sides of this. There are arguments in favor of making hate speech illegal. People argue that it's necessary to promote peace and civility and to protect minorities from discrimination and potential violence, and there's a lot to be said for that. But there are also arguments against making this kind of speech illegal, and that's too difficult to determine what qualifies as hate speech. And then, of course, we have the First Amendment, so restricting speech is a form of censorship and violation of the First Amendment. So all of us, me included, can improve our use of language. And the book talks about 4 specific strategies that we can use to do this. Considering the effect you wish to create, separating opinions from facts, speaking at an appropriate level, and owning your thoughts and feelings. Make certain that your message is appropriate to your audience. Think about what your purpose in speaking is. Consider your message from your audience's standpoint. So you need to understand and avoid these errors. So first you need to avoid what's called the shared knowledge error. That's presuming that your listeners have information they don't have. Have you ever been in a situation where somebody's talking to you like you should know what they're talking about? You're just looking at them going, what are you saying? Because you don't have enough knowledge, and they assume that you have specific knowledge of what they're talking about, but you may not. And you've probably done the same thing to somebody else. Don't just presume that whoever you're talking about knows exactly what you mean. The shared opinion error can be quite embarrassing, presuming your listeners share your opinions on the topic. So if you go on and on about how horrible some particular political candidate is, and they're just sitting there looking at you, and when you stop, they go, yeah, I'm going to vote for them. Then what do? After you've pretty much trashed them. I suppose you could get into an argument about it, but you're probably not going to change anybody's mind that way. And then there's something called the monopolization error, where you dominate the conversation and don't allow anybody else to interact. Guess what? You might like the sound of your own voice, but that doesn't mean everybody else does. Another thing you can do is to separate opinions from factual claims. Now, this can be very hard to do, especially if you have a very strong opinion about something. Our natural tendency is to consider our opinions to be the truth, and anything that runs counter to that opinion to be false. Understanding the difference between these things is very important. So factual claims are claims that we can verify with evidence and show to be true or false. And that evidence needs to be, again, verifiable, current, good, solid evidence that doesn't come with any bias. Opinion, on the other hand, is personal judgments or preferences that you can agree or disagree with, but cannot be proven to be either true or false in the absolute sense. Understanding the differences between those two things is really important, and opinions are great, but don't state them as if they were the truth. All right, so let's look at these. Which ones of these would be fact? Tom Cruise is a good actor is an opinion. Some other person might hold an entirely different opinion of Tom Cruise's acting ability. Saturn was discovered in the 1600s. Well, this is something that you can look up and see if indeed the statement is true. It might be false, but it's still a factual claim. You are claiming it to be a fact. Married adults are healthier than single adults. Again, I think there's been some research, and you can look up that research, and so you're making a factual claim that can be either proven to be true or false. The U.S. should establish universal health care. Now, the word should makes this opinion because, somebody else could say, no, they shouldn't. And both sides have good arguments on either side. Cats live longer than dogs on average. Again, something you can prove to be either true or false. Government should be spending more money to combat global warming. Again, opinion, because it's got the word should in there. Sometimes it's difficult to be able to tell the difference between opinions or factual claims. Now, speaking at an appropriate level, I don't mean speaking the volume level, too loud or too soft. No, this has to do with adapting to your audience. So you don't want to talk over their heads. You also don't want to talk down to somebody, especially if you're having a one-on-one conversation with them. Talking down is using language that's too simple for your audience, and if you're talking to someone like that, they're going to be insulted fairly quickly. Talking over their heads is using language that's too complex for your audience. And again, you're going to be confusing that person if they are not asking you questions back to try and figure out what it is that you're talking about. It can be very, very confusing to them. Finally, and this is really, really critical. In fact, sometimes I think this is the most important part of this entire chapter. Own your thoughts and feelings. Humans have a tendency to shift responsibility for themselves onto other people. Your thoughts and feelings are often responses to situations and experiences. So particularly when negative things are involved, we don't want to blame ourselves for the negative feelings that arise in us. You know someone, or you may have even said this yourself, you make me so mad, or you make me so happy. Whatever the issue, whether it's positive or negative one, somebody else does not make you mad or make you happy. You do that to yourself. Whatever the issue, these people are not taking responsibility for their own thoughts and feelings. So I statements are statements that allow the speaker to claim ownership of his or her thoughts or feelings. If I was mad about something, instead of going, you make me so mad, I would say, I'm really mad about this. That puts the responsibility for my thoughts and feelings on me and not on that other person. So you statements are the ones that shift responsibility to the other person and are not particularly effective. I statements are much less likely to make the other person defensive and less likely to feel like they're being attacked. No one's responsible for another person's feelings, so trying to pawn them off on somebody else is not good use of your communication skills. Okay, that's the end of the lecture on Chapter 5.